Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the RedWhoop ION 3-inch. This is a printed frame that's got some part of it that is nylon. My all-in-one flight controller is the Happy Model Crazy Bee F4 Lite. This is the 1S version. It has the onboard VTX and receiver. Camera is the Runcam Nano 3 with the second iteration of the lens. These are the RNC Power 1202 motors running 11,500 kV. Props are the Gym Fan 3016s. Motor post to motor post, I'm getting about 118 millimeters. It weighs about 41.5 grams. I flew it primarily on this G&B 520 milliamp 1S battery with an XT30 that I put on. That brings the weight to just about 56 grams. So we've seen the Red Shifters 3D printed frames on the channel a few times, and I know that there's a number of you that have these, so leave your comments on your experience with these printed frames down below, and I'm not going to talk about it too much. We've covered it in the past. I find them to be pretty reliable. I haven't really had much breakage as far as unusual breakage. I've had some hoops that kind of come apart, but again, I think getting a wider or broader experience range down in that comment section is better for anyone who might be uneasy about using a 3D printed frame. And these things are really quiet. It's almost like having a stealth quad. So if you have maybe sensitive neighbors, or if you have a nearby park and you don't want to really draw any attention to yourself, these things are very, very quiet. And I am flying that 520 milliamp battery. You can go up to a 600, but it threw off my tune. Speaking of the tune, it's not actually mine. It's Emu Flight, and I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. And I used Connor's preset. It has a preset that's pretty close to this motor prop combination for 1S. There is a little bit of refinement that I should probably make, but I wanted to just use the preset to show you what you can expect. If you build one, you use Emu Flight and you use Connor's tune on it. It's very flyable, and it actually feels really nice. And I think for those people that might be thinking that a PID tune will make their quad fly better and therefore make themselves a better FPV pilot, that's just not the case. Once you have a flyable tune, just fly it and have fun. Don't worry about little tiny changes. As long as you don't find yourself having the oscillations or a jiggly camera or something that's really obviously sloppy, just fly it and have fun. Don't worry about the little things on the tune. Most quads that you buy these days are already fairly well tuned. Manufacturers have done a much better job about giving us a tune. Whether it's something, a tune that you find spot on or not, it's maybe not the case, but at least it's very, very flyable in most cases. But this is a kit that you have to build yourself. So you've got to buy the motors, you've got to buy your all-in-one. If you buy an all-in-one that doesn't have a receiver, then you got to add a receiver. If you need to buy a VTX, then you buy a VTX, so on and so forth. But I want to be quiet here for a little bit so you get a chance to really listen to it without me talking. So I mentioned that I didn't care for the 600 milliamp battery on this particular one, and that's largely due to the fact that I just didn't like how it flies. I didn't care for how it handled that extra weight of that battery. If you're a cruiser, a bigger battery won't have as much of an impact. So if you're just going out and doing an exploratory flight, which is fun, a lot of people enjoy that. There's no problems with it. Any kind of flight is fun. I just found for my purposes in my yard, I didn't care for that battery. As far as the tune goes, I probably just need to pump up P on pitch and roll a little bit to tighten that up a little bit. But it's very, very flyable, as you've seen in the flight footage. And we land and we have a little bounce over the top. We have 3.5 volts. Those milliamps down at the bottom, hopefully you've been ignoring that because that's way off. I forgot to scale it.
Oh, look at that. 2,831.32. It's climbing.
I do have a crash I want to show, so let's go into that footage. And we're going to just enjoy a little bit more flight before we get to the crash. Unfortunately, I don't have sound on that crash. So we're just going to have to kind of assimilate the sound in our heads. I think the sound would have been important, but I wasn't recording sound, or I either lost the footage. My field camera has been shutting down on me. It doesn't matter hot or cold. It just kind of randomly shuts off and then it loses its recording. That may have been the case, or I may have just forgot to hit the record button on it. But I'm going to get out of shape. I'm going to then hit the shed and bonk. But as you've already seen, no real damage to speak of. Frame's fine. I didn't mention in the quick roll, but I used a rubber band and a tiny bit of the ultralight UMA grip to kind of give my battery a little extra stiffness. I do have a capacitor on here. I didn't put that on there for any other reason other than it was already on there. I shortened the lead a little bit, but I just left the capacitor on there. If you find that you have wavy lines, not the jello kind of lines, but like motor noise lines is what we oftentimes refer to it as. We got all these components on one board. A capacitor can help to clean up your video feed a little bit. It can also help with your tune, and if you've got some extra noise, possibly getting in there some feedback from the motor and the voltage going in and out of the all-in-one board. So a capacitor isn't a terrible idea. This is a tiny little capacitor. I'm not certain I can read that. Let me turn it over. I think it's upside down on the print. I see on there it's a 16 volt 100 microfarad capacitor. So it's a little tiny guy that's in there. And this frame allows you to still get access to your USB port if you have one that's down facing. Of course, if you have one coming off the board, you should be able to get your USB port in there. You just come in, as long as it's not real long, it doesn't have an extra long nose for those boards that have the USB port coming off here. I do have one quad with this print that I did break this canopy. I crashed on the patio on the cement, and it did crack this. It still holds the camera fine. I didn't even glue my camera in. As you can see, it's a little bit disjointed there. I usually, before each flight, just kind of looked at the camera and like, oh yeah, that looks good. And then I went for a fly. If you really want your camera to stay put, a little bit of glue, I would suggest using welder hot glue. I'm not a fan of hot glue. I just don't think it holds very well, but it is quick and easy. So use your favorite adhesive if you want to secure your camera in there. There is a screw with a nut on this side, so you can adjust your camera angle back and forth. You are limited to the amount of up tilt you've got by these little arms out here that hold your camera in place. So you might not get 90 degrees out of it because the support doesn't come out that far. But something that's always interesting about these that we can kind of only do with 3D print is that when you look at it from a top, you don't really have very many flat surfaces. The board is the largest flat surface, whereas in traditional quads, we usually have flat arms. So it would seem that these are more aerodynamic and thus more efficient in flight. But of course, you have flat surfaces this way. They're not technically flat. You can see they have some angles to them all the way around. So I think these are fairly efficient in flight because of some of those angles. You don't have hard flat surfaces that are acting to give you much resistance. There are a number of things you could do to go lighter. One of those things would be to remove the plugs and solder your leads on. These particular motors do not come with plugs, so I added plugs. You can see it best right over here. So I snipped some bad motor plugs off and soldered these up. I tend to run my antenna through those little slots. Just kind of keeps them out of harm's way. This is the one I worry about the most because it is so flexible, but it's got enough stiffness provided you don't have a crash and then, try to take off with the prop that's, it won't even go over there with the way I've got it. Maybe it'll go this way. Let's see, test that. I've never had a problem with an antenna. Come on, let's see. Let's give this a test. Well, it's potential there that you might, if you were to have a crash and then you were to, happen to land flat. I wouldn't suggest using turtle mode on any really 1S boards outside. So I would suggest picking it up and not using turtle mode. But if you did, say you landed on a hard flat surface and you turtle mode and then you come up, there's a possibility with one of these soft antennas, it could hit a prop and chop that up. And then you'll likely have some other issues to take care of. Probably the biggest challenge in building these is getting that all-in-one flight controller in. I would suggest loosening these screws that support the bottom. You can see the screw heads right here on all four corners. Loosen two of those up on one side so that this base plate is free. That will then give you the ability to pull this apart more because it is a good snug fit down in there. Of course, you wouldn't have the top canopy on at that point when you're putting your board in. But unscrewing two screws on one side, whichever side you choose, that will give it some more pliability so that you can pull it apart. With it all screwed down like here, it really doesn't have much flex. As you can see, I'm kind of pulling on it right now. Hopefully you can see that little bit of flex. As far as testing it's going to flex this way for sure, and it's going to flex this way. It's not terrible, but, carbon, of course, is much stiffer, but it doesn't have this aerodynamic advantage. I think the next thing I want to do with this particular frame is try to build a 2S version. If you have a combination of parts that you would like to see, please let me know. I'll have links to these particular parts if I can find them, down in the video description. And if you have any comments, suggestions, questions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.